Good morning. Welcome back to Pastor's Morning Walk. It's another beautiful morning in North Carolina. I've started at this beautiful crepe myrtle behind me, but I would note the spiritual lesson. The blossoms are not nearly as nice as they were. They are fading. Good morning. And Scripture is clear. We are all like those blossoms. We fade. All the glory of man is like a flower. It comes and it goes. Now, crepe myrtle blossoms do have a remarkable staying power, but it's still only a small part of the year. The trees have their own beauty outside of the blooming season, but I can already see that they have passed their peak. And this should be a reminder of the vanity of this world and of the folly then of trusting in earthly things. They will all fade, including ourselves. Man is a shadow. He's a breath. He comes and goes. How foolish then to trust in our own self, or to trust in man, or to seek his favor as we would seek the favor of God. Only God endures forever, and thus only God is worthy of our trust. This morning, before I read my Bible, as I occasionally do, I opened my journal, and I wanted to just briefly talk about the benefits of journaling. Putting down thoughts occasionally. At this point, I do every few weeks, though at times I've done daily, weekly. But I make sure to do at least some journaling, write a small paragraph about the notable things going on, because it is a help to memory. First, my own. Looking back at previous journals, I'm able to keep a catalog of my soul, of the things going on, and especially of things for which to thank God. I think this is very important, that we would not forget His mercies. It also helps keep track of progress and spiritual things. It is striking, looking back at past journal entries and how the same problems often keep recurring, but also the same mercies keep coming, and that is sweet. So I would encourage you to use journaling, and it is a help to meditation, to write down thoughts. I returned this morning to Job, and in Job, I read through chapter 31. And in 31, at the conclusion of Job's speech, in 32, a new man, Elihu, comes to speak. In 31, Job summarizes all that he said in the previous chapters. And the sum is basically, I'm a righteous man. I've done right. I've lived godly. Now, as we'll consider in the next chapter with Elihu, this is not right in every way because he justified himself rather than God. You don't see Job so zealous to defend God's righteousness as he is to defend his own. But we must not, like Job's friends, overreact and think this is proof of some terrible hypocrisy in Job and that he's avoiding the punishment due to his hypocritical dissembling. No, there's a sense in which Job is just right about himself. He knows that he's a righteous man. And it is not wrong to be honest with God about the grace of God that He has worked in us and for us. You think of Nehemiah. Do you remember how he wrote down his good deeds and said, God, remember me for my good? That's humble. It's humble for a Christian to expect a reward according to God's promise for grace that was given, for God to crown His grace with more grace. It's good to be thankful to God for grace given us in our life, because if we know, as we should, that we are helpless and hopeless sinners, that without the power of God we have no ability to do any good work, then when we discover in ourselves true, sincere good works, it ought to be a cause for thankfulness. in the Lord. As Jeremiah says, we're not to boast in riches, but we are to boast in knowing the Lord. To understand and know the Lord is a cause for great rejoicing. So Job, in that respect, is right. And his righteousness that he declares is a model for us. We were told by God in the first chapter that Job was a righteous man. And the specifics he gives ought to encourage us. Two to mention here. One is in the beginning of 31, he says, I have made a covenant with mine eyes. How then can I think upon a maid? Well, especially in our evil age, this is a rebuke and a model. There are many things to entice the eyes, particularly of men, in this evil age. And there is much cause to make a similar covenant, even explicitly, to vow before the Lord that our eyes will not look upon any enticing thing, any enticing woman, whether in real life or in pictures, videos, on the phone, the internet. Job is a rebuke to our pornographic age. And I would exhort you to take good care to flee this defiling sin. And even if need be, if there is an extraordinary need, to use the extraordinary act of worship, of covenanting, of vow making, to promise to God a duty you already owe him to be morally pure, but to further bind yourself to that duty by making a covenant, and to make it, so to speak, with your eyes, so that they would join you as a party in that covenant and refuse to look. And your mind then, the eyes of your mind, refusing, as Job says, to think upon a maid. Give yourself to purity in heart, in eyes, in speech, and in behavior. Job is a good model in that. He's also a good model in what he spends more time on in this chapter and the previous, that he was eyes to the blind. He was one to help those in need. He cared for the widow and the orphan. He was gracious, merciful, and compassionate to men in their need. Well, remember, James tells us that this is true religion, to visit orphans and widows in their distress. Look at that beautiful one. Wow. To visit orphans and widows in their distress. To meet real needs. If you're familiar with 1 John or with Titus, you know this is a repeated theme in the exhortations in the New Testament, that we are to give ourselves to caring for the poor and for meeting real needs, especially among the body of our fellow Christians. So I would challenge you to think, are you a charitable person? Do you love to give? Are you generous? Do you have an eye for need? Or do you conveniently say to yourself, well, I would give, but I don't really know any opportunities? Well, be careful. There is plenty of need, and I don't think, honestly, that you are without opportunities to give. This is not just about money, of course. There are many other resources and blessings you can give. Comfort, encouragement, reproof, instruction, counsel. I said that, but the principle is that you would see the needs of the needy, and you would, according to your place and calling, respond. Job is a good model in that too. We'll continue in the fifth commandment. You remember last time I spoke of the duties of children to the parents. But the nature of the fifth commandment and of all the commandments is such that it teaches us a virtue that applies in more ways than explicitly stated. And one of the most obvious is the reciprocal duty of parents to their children. And this is worth taking a bit of time on. I said that last time the duty of parents to their children was routinely neglected. There's such a lack of honor and obedience and respect, and it ruins things. Well, this is true the other way around. Parents have hard and callous hearts toward their children. Just a moment, I want to show you some creatures here. We've got some horses. Let me see if I can turn this around. There they are. Look at that. Look at what I get to see most mornings. So, parents have duties to their children. Children have duties toward their parents. So today, parents toward their children. They ought first to provide them all their needs. It is their duty to care for them, that they would have a competent portion of the good things of this life. Competent meaning fitting and belonging to them. Parents fail here, many, thinking that they have to provide for their children all sorts of comforts, and thinking that it's a strict moral duty that they would make their children wealthy. In a way, even that keeps them from other duties. They can't go to a good church, they can't send their children to a Christian school, or homeschool them, or have mom not work outside the home, because they just can't afford to provide for their children, they say. Well, if your children have food and clothing, if they have a livelihood that is sufficient for them, then you have been faithful in this duty, and you don't need to multiply comforts out of the excuse of providing for your family. Now, if you have the means to provide comforts, and you don't give them to your family, then that is heartless. But God does not expect, good morning, God does not expect every Christian to be wealthy. You do not have to live an upper middle class lifestyle to be a faithful Christian. Nonetheless, though, you ought to provide for your children a competent portion of the good things of this life. But if that's true in temporal things, how much more in spiritual things? You ought to provide for them Christian instruction, both in church and school, but also, and do not neglect this, in your own instruction. Fathers, it is not enough to give your children an opportunity for Christian school or homeschool and to bring them to church. You must teach them. You must teach them. Deuteronomy 6 makes that very clear. When you rise up, when you go out, in all that you do, day and night, you have a duty to impress upon your children spiritual principles, and not only to read to them the Word of God, but to apply it to them. And I find this is greatly lacking. I even know some Christians who are diligent in family worship, but all Dad does is open the Bible and read it and close it. Perhaps he'll pray. But there is no seeking of the hearts of the children. There's no applying and searching and impressing upon them the things that are learned and adapting them to each of the children's needs. This is very important. You may not be called to be a minister, but you are supposed to be a sort of pastor, a shepherd to the sheep that God has given you. And this includes using the means of instruction, including discipline. He that spares the rod hates his son, the Proverbs say. He that loves him is diligent to discipline him. And God promises to bless the believing use of the rod and takes away our excuses that we might harm our children. No, the rod is precisely a means to help them, and to help them in a greater way than any temporal blessing you can give them, because it drives foolishness from their heart. If you strike him with the rod, he will not die. If you beat him, the King James says, with the rod, you will save his soul from hell. Much greater than hunger or thirst, any poverty or trouble in the things of this life, is the great evil of sin. And if you suffer your children to live in sin because you fail to discipline them, you hate your children, and you are not serving them as you should. And I'll add finally, to connect to yesterday, a basic part of your instruction in your children is requiring them to obey you. Parents fail here often, and you must not. You ought to be patient with your children, but you ought not let up on requiring them that they must keep the fifth commandment and honor their father and their mother. Fathers, you need to ensure that your children respect and obey you and your wife, and you need to deal with disobedience as the great sin that it is. You are forbidden to disobey your own parents, as I mentioned last time, and you are also forbidden to allow your children to disobey their parents. May the Lord help you in these duties.